Well, hello, this is Dr. Chris Lemmon, and this is my March talk. Yes, I had to shuffle things around a little bit. So I had one talk I wound up excluding out and shuffling things around, trying to get a little bit of smaller focus going, at least coming into the idea of what we're building on this year. Um, and I think that last month I talked a little bit about what I believe in, and I believe in that we have a huge influence, and we can influence things, and most certainly. And so we have to take a look at like, why doesn't that always work out real well? Why sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't seem to work out? How can we expand that out? How can we get some more skill at that and define that in a better sort of way? When you start to look around at really, really good salespeople that have lead in a company and whatever they're doing, you find that they've got some great skill sets. You can look around and you see samples of those things being able to, what are the elements? What are the pieces that are involved in? What do we have to shuffle around with? What do we have to work with? And we're starting to build that. The first thing you really need, and we've been working on that the last year or so, is to start with an empty space, clean the slate out. Uh, I'll give you an example. For a little while in my life, I've done a lot of things, but for a little while in my life, I did some stained glass work. And what I found is in selling those projects is I would go look at someone's house. Yes, the criterion would be they had to have enough money to pay for it. So I'm looking at expensive homes, of course. That's the neighborhood I'm in. And I'm looking at the home and I'm looking at the design of the home and the layout of the home. And so I see a front door, I see a couple of windows in the front, and I can start to say, wow, what is the theme that the house is reflecting? Because then that needs to be reflected in the stained glass. And what is the layout? Because then the light comes through, it needs to flow somewhere. So what is that layout? So before I even go to talk to the people in the house, I call, make an appointment, but I get an idea of what the layout of the house. Sometimes I have to pull plans from the house to see where the flow goes, where the light flows, how it needs to materialize. So when I sit down, I have some idea of what their parameters were walking in the door. Then we have a conversation. What is their dream? How could they enrich the experience of living in that house? I'm really looking at like, no, how do I make it fit in their doorway or in their windows over the door or the front windows in the house? No, no, no. I'm looking at like enriching. How can I expand those parameters of what they imagined when they spent, a half million to $1.5 million for this house? Like, what we're trying to gain, what makes it comfortable for you, what makes it like you just walk in there just in awe, because as the day progresses, the light changes and it starts to dance in that room, makes it alive, makes it a powerful experience. You see, the elements I'm talking about is not just the logical pieces, what fits, measure the windows, figure out what colors will go where or whatever. Those are logical pieces. But I'm trying to get into something in part of their limbic brain, part of their emotional piece, right? We like to call those elements um, in the emotional element. We look at saying they're intuitive, right? Intuitive means that they're ideas I have, but they don't always fit a logical piece. So it's like, so I'm relating to you and I can get a feeling of what you're going on. Maybe it won't come up in conversation, or maybe I have to extract it from conversation. Maybe I need to start a story, maybe I need to do something to get you there so it'll flower and I can start to see it, right? So that's the kind of the matrix that I would work with. So when I walked in, I believed that without a doubt, I could go ahead and improve the look of their house and the feel of their house as a salesman coming in to be able to, number one, sell the window, number two, design the window, get an agreement or flow that's going with it. So it expands as something they just love and hold dear to them. Um, and I had people ready that sold a house and contacted me years later and said, do you still do stained glass windows? I just, it was really a hardship leaving that house. They offered us so much money for it, it was unbelievable. But now we've got a different house and we're starting over again. And I go, no, I only did that for a couple of years, but I'll come meet with you and we'll bounce some ideas around, give you a little bit of my time, and we'll see what we can do. Maybe I can help direct you a little bit on what to say to someone who's going to come in and start to do this design work. And we can have a couple of conference calls and see if we can't build something that would be fitting. Do you see how it has to be bigger? You know, we think of imagination as like all fantasy. Oh, it's all fantasy. Well, fantasy means no boundaries. So if you have a fantasy and it has no boundaries, what's the likelihood you're going to get it into the logical world? We got come on, look, you got a body, you got a logical world, you got ceilings, you got doorways to get through, you've got lots of things to deal with, right? Kids, when they're starting to grow up, they're the moment they're born, it's their imagination trying to be able to put parameters so that they can abandon the world of like, I can imagine me into the world of I can imagine me in this form, in this structure, in this parameters within my family, my culture, my religion, my belief systems, my habits of eating, what's going to work for me, what's not going to work for me, how can I move, how can I grow, how can I develop? Those are the big questions that sit with kids. Oh, everybody gets out in a fantasy, blah, 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 whatever. But it doesn't go anywhere because it doesn't have a boundary. It has no place where it can integrate. And so, no matter what you're doing in your life, if you sit there and you have a dream of being something, yeah, I originally went to college in engineering because I wanted to build something. I wanted to do something. I had this idea of creating something. And when I got into the midst of that whole thing, I started realizing, wow, it's kind of interesting that there are a group of people that are setting the rules of the structure of the perimeters on everything. Uh, you know, uh, I don't know if you've ever been to Barcelona, but it's great going to Barcelona and looking at Gaudi's projects. I'm not an architect, but I looked at Gaudi's projects and it's like, wow, all bets were off because he took ideas and he expanded. He expanded the structure out to where it was huge. I mean, it was huge. So you see a ceiling in a cathedral, and really you're looking at them, and it's just simply a flower that's opening up, makes each one of those sections of the cathedral roof. And you look at these simple ideas expanded out hugely. Would he be able to operate today in the world? No, he could barely operate then in the world. He got very few projects because he was so pricey. Everything was outrageous. When you have a four-story building where every door in that building is a different size, a different shape, a different dimension. I understand the cost of that is unfathomable, right? But the uniqueness is amazing. So this is the dance that we do. We try to get it within the context of how do I survive, pay the bills, manage in life, blah, blah, blah. How do I manage to do all that kind of stuff within the confines of the structure? And yet, how do I open that up to where I can get an expanse? I can squeeze more juice out of the fruit of life. How do I do that? And so that's where I think influence comes into play. Now, yes, in the next couple blogs, we're going to be talking about some techniques that we can actually play with in our imagination as we start to move forward, start to entertain things in a different sort of way. I found as soon as I have it all figured out, I need to sit down with someone and have a conversation. And I need to minimize my input. I need to just set tent stakes in the ground and say, what do you think of this? And expand it a little bit past their range of thinking. And by extending it out, I see them open up. And so we can call that intuitively, I feel them open up. Yes, I most certainly, because what drives that? It's that limbic brain that drives that. It's not this logical, calculating neocortex that drives that silliness. It's that imagined piece of like, wow, where do we get the passion? Where do we get the energy from it? It comes from that stage kind of between that unconscious alarm system that we have that's all designed to keep us safe, whether it comes from unconscious programming or it comes from reptile brain or whatever story you want to buy. It doesn't really much matter. But I see so many people have those limitations so tight around them. They are so constricting, they are so fearful that the body doesn't have a chance to embrace the idea of being healthy. It can't move forward. So they become clustered in and tight, and they can't move. They can't breathe. They can't squeeze the juice out of life. They can't get nutrition out of their food. So they start to look at minimum commitment. What's the least I can move? What is the cheapest way I can entertain myself, which basically means I can put myself into a really narrow range, narrow box, and be happy with that delight and not think outside of it. And get onto a tight schedule where everything goes click, 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 and I never have to really wake up. And I can run around most all the time in a trance because that way I don't have to engage very much. Um, it unfortunately sounds like a lot of people's lives, When I started noticing people that couldn't think bigger, I found that lots of times they had health challenges too. It's not a rule. It's just something I've noticed, right? And so it's like, wow, it's kind of interesting. So I used to tie that in. I used to say, could you imagine being healthy enough to be able to expand that out? Um, it would be good. I see you're walking with a limp. It would be good to be able to walk a couple miles a day. Could you imagine what it would take to be able to be healthy enough to do that? Where would you have to go? Uh, you're probably seeing a doctor because you're limp. You probably have something diagnosed as an ailment. I'm not saying the doctor's wrong. Most certainly not. I like doctors. What I'm saying is that that's a logical constraint. That's what they're doing. They've analyzed it in a logical package, and there it is. I'm looking at influencing more. Where can we go with this? How could we get this bigger? How, where do we go? I knew a guy many, many years ago, and he was a broker. And I was looking at an investment group that I was kind of playing around with, thinking to work with. And so I kind of looked at them and what offers they had available. And then I looked at their competition and I looked at some of the elements in their package. And I went around and met some of these other people for coffee or dinner or took them to dinner or did whatever because I wanted to get a bigger picture. I didn't want to go in and say, this is your job and this is what we expect you to do. It's like, are the expectations realistic? Can I make those expectations happen, or am I going to be frustrated in this? Why should I engage in this? So I went around and met a few people, and I met this guy that was very a charming guy. He was overweight and most certainly in investment business. And we were talking a little bit, and I said, I'm thinking about going to work for this company. How are they to work with from your end of it? And he said, well, they're high stress. There's just a lot of push, you know. And he said, but maybe that's me. My wife right now has got cancer. She's dying. And it's kind of like, so I'm under a little bit of stress. So when you start to talk about those kind of people, I kind of like, I don't need that in my life, right now. I got enough going on, blah, blah, blah. And I could empathetically listen to him. And I said, you know, I, I realize you're a busy man and we're just having a cup of coffee. And so I'm I'm here to pick your brain. But by that same token, I think it'd be kind of nice if we planned another meeting and you and I would get a cup of coffee to go at Starbucks or someplace, and we just go walk to a park for about 20 minutes and just let ideas flow rather than sitting here and trying to, because it feels like I'm trying to get an opinion out of you, and you're sitting there and you're saying, you know, I'm not sure I like them, but it's not my thing, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, we're not getting on the same wavelength here. I want to find out what I want to do with my life. And it sounds like you've got some things going on. So let's go bounce around a little bit. Let's go talk about, your first bicycle or whatever. open things up from a different starting point. Hey, it's just when you get off work or on a weekend or sometime you have time and you don't have to answer me right now, think about it. So it was 4 weeks till the guy sent me a message. Back in those days, we didn't have emails. He left it on my phone machine, right? And he wanted to meet on a Saturday morning because he had an appointment. He had to go see someone he had to see on a Saturday morning. And he said, after that, I'm going to be a little stressed. I think it'd be nice to rather than just go home. So basically, he was going to see a specialist. And he was trying to figure out what kind of chances his wife would have if she actually went to see the specialist. And he had made the appointment on a Saturday morning because the guy was so busy, he had no time. So he had a 15-minute appointment with a specialist on a Saturday morning to see if he could get surgery or something for his wife to save her. And basically, when he came out and I'm there with 2 cups of Starbucks to meet with him to go for a walk and drink a little coffee, he was pretty much uptight. We spent 2.5 hours walking and talking. And when it was all done, he said, this is amazing. I understand that there's no way I'm going to be able to save my wife. I don't like that. But, you know, what I got from spending this time with you is I need to go spend this time with her too. I need to do this with her. Maybe not walk around with a Starbucks, but I need to spend this time just whatever, like we are, just talking about life. And because I'm going to lose that partner, and it's very sad. I was almost in tears. Emotional piece was really strong because we had spent so much time talking about growing up as kids, talking about, what was valued, talking about family values, talking about blah, 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 all this kind of stuff that had nothing to do with stupid jobs. Geez, but real people. And so interactive piece was what was there. That was the last I heard from him. Years later, years, 15 years later, maybe, I'm up with a group of Boy Scouts on a hiking trail up above Tahoe. And they're older scouts, advanced. And so we went up there for a weekend to camp out. There was like 9 of us. And they were a handful. They were bigger kids. They were confident. It was a little scary, but it was fun. And so we're out there wandering around, and we we camped out at Lake of the Pines up there, and we had this campsite. And the kids, I just kind of, hey, you guys, set up camp, do your thing. There you go. I'm staying out of it. They don't need a boss. They're doing just fine. They've been around. They do whatever they're doing. And I'm just kind of sitting back watching them. I'm thinking, okay, this is no problem. I'm just going to throw my tent up over in the corner and pretty much minimum. And I'm just going to join them in whatever they're cooking. That's no problem. And I hear this guy, rumbly voice, saying, "You son of a," and I'm kind of like, huh? I look around and it's this guy that I had talked to that was probably 80 pounds overweight, way back when his wife was dying. Here it is, maybe 10, 12 years later. And there he is, standing there. And I going, I know you, but I don't remember your name. So we started talking. And it turned out that his wife did die. And when she died, he took and decided he's not going to work anymore. He's done. So the doctor had already told him he's got a heart problem. He's not going to live very long. And this stressor, his wife dying, is probably going to do him in. So it's like, and he had health issues and he had some bad habits. And he was drinking too much and blah, blah, blah. And so he said, that the only excuse, the only thing I can find as a solution is either die or get out of town. So I decided to get out of town. I sold the house. I sold all my investments. I sold everything. I put it all into a bank account. And I went all the way to Canada. And in the spring up there, I decided to walk to Mexico on the Pacific Crest Trail. And he said, I started doing that, and I walk and I walk. And I've been on this trail now 4 years, 4 years walking on this trail. He said, I've lost weight. I feel strong. He said, every now and then I get to a little town where I can kind of leave the trail and get down to the town. I'll buy some packs, supplies, and buy this and get that, and even get a little bottle of whiskey or something and put it in my backpack. And now I got back on the trail again. And he said, it's amazing. He said, uh, it just, I don't know what I would do with my life if it weren't for just this hike on the trail. I, it was the walk with you that got me started. And I realized that's the best I felt in years, the most together I'd ever got. So I just need to get a bigger walk. That's all I needed was a bigger walk. And he said, so I've been thinking about the Appalachian Trail. I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about that, but I'm not sure it makes any difference. It's like I meet so many people. I sit and talk with them. And it's like, I hope you're going to be here a day or so because, it's like I haven't talked to you in a long time. Do you get this? Is like this opens up doorways. This is what life gets to be about. That connected piece is the magic that comes in. We sat there and just the kids were delighted because I didn't get in their hair about anything. They just like they did whatever they did. They ran around, they looked at this, they had fun. And I just sat with him and BS with him and we just talked and we walked and we talked and we walked and we had breakfast together in the morning. And then I said, hey, I gotta take the kids. I'm going up to Lower Lake. And he said, oh, okay, later. It was such an interesting piece to connect pieces of life together, years between, and to have that kind of unfold and recognize that uh, somewhere in my search for a, a bigger piece that I could imagine for me going forward and getting into a different job, a different piece, a different something in life. I've done that a million times. Um, Trying to get to a bigger piece and find someone I thought maybe could help me. And it's just like we both expanded out. I never took that job with that company. I went off and did something totally different. And I have changed many, many times. And I just always done it because it's just like, okay, it's time for change. It's like, it's time for change. I need to expand it out a little bit. I need to expand it. I need to change this. I need to shuffle this. I need to so did I go to a lot of jobs? Did I go to a lot of relationships? Oh yeah, all the above, right? Have I ever settled down in life? Well, come on, I'm now 80 years old. I got to settle down a little bit because the body's starting to get sore, climb up and down those mountains. But I still enjoy that. My wife and I just came back from 3 days in the mountains. We're in Oregon, up in a logging area, and the weather wasn't all that favorable. It was a little drizzly and a little cold. So it was about 45 degrees, 47 degrees. But we were out there. I was out there in my t-shirt and we were hiking around. As long as I can stay in motion, I can pretty much stay warm. And we were hiking around some lakes and we were hiking up some trails. And I found one that really looked good. We walked a little ways and then finally somebody was coming down on a bicycle and I said, how long is this trail? And he said 22 miles. And I go, okay, I think, you know, to my wife, I think, maybe we probably should start to head back. I'm not up for 22 miles, especially I didn't, I'm just assuming, I'm not sure if that was one way or round trip, but either way, it was too far for me to walk in the cold. Yeah. But the adventures in life start to be in that empty space because that's where you put the package bigger. You push those perimeters out. And it starts out as being able to attend to it. How do I get this to be a bigger piece? How do I squeeze more out of this moment? How do I get this to be, how do I do that? Right. I, it's like, wow, it's so interesting. I, I talked to a lady when I was up there and she was trying to sell her house and she said they had a buyer was looking at their house and blah, 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 blah. And, and they decided not to buy it. And so the guy came, looked at the house, spent some time there, didn't really talk to them very much, and it just left and then sent them an email saying, thank you very much, but we decided not to buy it. And the three things that he decided they didn't like was number one, he said, your hot tub wasn't working. And this is in February, right? So this was in late January when he toured the place, last week of January. He said the hot tub wasn't working. He said, I look at the drains in your house, you don't have drains running out anywhere. So that's a big problem with water. And he said, and your deck is kind of worn. So I'm talking to the lady and she said, it's so bizarre. Who would think someone would be running their hot tub? It's an outside hot tub in January. It's raining, it's snowing, it's cold. It's like, why would you run a hot tub? It's like crazy. We have it turned off. It's not broken. It works. It just, we don't have it running. It's nice on a cold night, but not in a night when it's 30 degrees. That's a little bit beyond just trying to stay warm in a hot tub. So it's turned off, but they never asked. And then look at the house. The house has drains coming down off the roof, but they're French drains. They come down and they go underground. We don't have any problem because we don't want water running anywhere. Everything is routed underground. And they never asked. They wanted to know where the drain lines were. It's like you can't see them because they're French drains. They're underground. They're hidden. And then they come back and they said the deck was worn. And I'm thinking, it's January. Why would I put, why would I repair the deck? I was going to repair the deck come spring. And it's like, wow. So, okay. So my husband says, well, out of those three complaints, maybe what we should do is take it off the market and repair the deck and then put it back on the market again. That will give us, do you understand what I'm saying about a range? That gives us a bigger range. And then we put a sign on the hot tub, closed for winter, right? And then we put a sign on the building on the outside that says, this building, to avoid drainage to our neighborhood, this building is constructed with French drains on all the drain lines. And put up a sign, since they didn't ask a question. We assumed that if they saw something wrong, they'd ask a question. Our mistake was assuming. We should have been able to, with a bigger range, we can answer those questions. It's kind of like it was fun talking to those people and seeing that they didn't feel rejected. That, yes, they bought a really big house because they had 6 kids. And what happens to kids, as we all know, is they grow up and they leave. And so now they have a house with 6 extra bedrooms upstairs. They don't need any more. They want to buy themselves a nice little house that's like 2 bedrooms where occasionally maybe a kid might come visit, but they don't want to support that structure at all. It's like the heating bill, everything else would be outrageous for no reason. So that's exactly what they were trying to do, was to sell for someone that had a need for that. And these people claimed they wanted a bigger house. So there it is. What do you want? You know, it's interesting. You see, that ability to stretch that out starts to answer questions, starts to build a different relationship. They needed to find a buyer for the house, but they really needed to have one that was like being able to communicate, had better skills of communicating, be overcome and have they should have sat down in the living room of the house and had a conversation for a couple of hours over a cup of coffee or tea or something and a couple of cookies and said, hey, it's like, what's your dream? What's your vision? What's going on? There should have been dialogue in there rather than people coming over and inspecting the house, looking around and just getting in a car and leaving. It's like, this is like, wow. So it's amazing to see how this could make your life different. You have to bring this into that package. You have to, wherever you want to go, you're going to have to build it now so that when you arrive, it's there. You have to make it all possible. You have to move those perimeters out. You have to expand that out. You have to be able to start the influence now for whatever is going to occur. Right? You don't sit there and think opportunity will avail itself. That's always a surprise, right? And yes, I got millions of stories. I'm not going to tell a whole bunch of stories. So I'm going to be good. All right. I have a tendency to be very long-winded, obviously, as you know. So you followed some of this. So we're going to start in the blogs teaching some techniques of being able to move those perimeters out so that we got room now. We can move them out. We don't have those limitations in there. We're going to need to have a limitation, but somewhere much bigger. Because we want to be able to convert that which is imagined into form in some way, shape, or form, something. So it has to have parameters. Otherwise, it's just going to be an idea in our head, and that's all it's going to be. So that integration is what we're working towards. last thing, one of the challenges is this neocortex likes to think in a logical piece, blah, 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 think AI, think, blah, 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 which has its limitations because it doesn't have an emotional element. And then we have a limbic brain that thinks an emotional element. So keep those two in mind because that emotional element, that emotion means the energy to make something happen, emote, right? So that's where the energy comes from. The energy starts to flow. This logical brain just builds parameters. The two, as humans, it's very mystical, magical. We can imagine something, we put out parameters, and we build it. And so whether it's your lifetime or a relationship, a new family, a new idea, a new business, or just health, it's like, what are we trying to build here? You need to put it out a little bit so it's not constricting you. If it coming in and constricting you, you've all of a sudden lost that piece. And now all this stuff is stressing and rubbing and wearing. It doesn't do you any good. And so you're going to have to build it bigger, and you're going to have to be respectful of the fact that you've got at least two operating programs, if not three, because you still got all those unconscious alarms going off that get us intimidated, scared, and apprehensive. And so we're very, very complex by its very nature. And and it's not apparent to us. It's not highly visible. And I have taught and worked with people for the last 80 years. And it's like, yeah, they never have a clue. And even if you start to talk to them, they'll argue with you. They'll tell you, no, this is the way it is. No, this is the way it is. It's like, oh my gosh, it's just so amazing. And you know that once you can take them to the edge of the water, but you just can't make them drink. And and if they start to drink and they start to move into that, they start to have their life expand, sometimes you can see that work out, but most of the time you see it go the other way. I see so many people that want to go out in the country and they, I'm going to go live off the land. I'm going to go out in the country. I'm going to do this, going to do that. And it's like, well, that's okay, but where are you going to get water? I've got friends that bought 60 acres and they're living in a manufactured home and they have to buy water and take it in because there's no water source out there. They thought they had a water source, but wasn't sufficient. The well was pretty close to non-existent. 8 pounds of pressure is not going to buy you much. And try to put pressure tanks and pumps in, pulling off water. Now it's just up. So they did a little digging, but that range wasn't big enough. So they invested a lot of money and now sitting in a little motorhome out on 60 acres with cables and wires and stuff running to conduits, trying to stay warm during the winter time, trying to figure out what they're going to do with that property. You see, it's really, really important to be able to build all those pieces together to get more information, to be able to assemble that, to be able to ask more questions, to have a lot more interaction so that you can not only gather the data, which you need, but you can also set up the emoting piece. What drives you to do it? Not drives you to respond to some story, but drives you to build it, produce it, put it together, assemble it. I don't care if you pay someone. Bottom line is you have to have the vision for it, or your conversation with them is going to be lost because you're going to wind up with whatever they think, which is may be very different than what you think. If you understand what I'm saying, it's kind of like it's got to get bigger. And that's where it all starts. So thank you very much. It's been fun. And so we'll see as we start to move into the next series of blogs. We'll start to show you piece by piece this year of some of the elements that restrict those pieces. And I'll be doing some more talks about those and how we can move those parameters forward and have a lot more fun and a lot more excitement and a lot more accomplishment in life, hopefully. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them to chris@wizardscats.com, and I'd be glad to answer your questions. And let's have a little bit more potential, a little more fun in life. Opportunities here, a lot of change going on. So